Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to roll right into the next panel. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're going to discuss a little bit of logistics and conflict, and here to lead this panel is Colonel Howeard Marotto. And I have notes for Howeard Marotto that are more formal than perhaps are necessary, but those of you who got an opportunity to hear from him yesterday know what he brings to the table, and is a longtime mentor of mine for the last 6 years, and somebody who has invested a tremendous amount not only into the logistics community, but into the broader spectrum of talent management and bringing the right people to the right fight at the right time. I'm excited to have you up here to have this conversation.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And I think we have a couple of our panelists are here.
That's right. Ma'am, how are you? I'm well. Okay, thank you, sir.
Good morning. All right. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for sticking around, right? Here we are on Thursday. A lot of people have already left, so you who are left are the real, I think, logistics warriors here, or you're really bored, or you don't have anything better to do, right? But you're here, and I think we're going to keep it interesting for you. We're going to stay classy, as my hero Ron Burgundy would say, but I think we're going to continue. It's interesting. I didn't coordinate with the commandant. He coordinated with me. Just kidding. But it's interesting. We're going to continue some of the themes that he started last night. And for those of you who don't know me, typically I have a full head of hair like John. But last night after I had dinner with the commandant, I was inspired to shave my head and look like the commandant. So don't be fooled by this. I typically have a lot of hair, and I'm as handsome as John normally. But anyways, at any rate, logistics and conflict, right? That's what we're here for. We have a very diverse panel. Sean, I've known many years. The others I haven't. But I think we're going to get some different perspectives, and we're going to pull the string on some things that maybe are a little uncomfortable. Because if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. As logisticians, we should all be uncomfortable right now, and that's kind of where we're going to go here today. So what I'm going to do is allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves, where they're from, a bit about their history, and talk about maybe one thing for 5 minutes or less that they're passionate about in logistics and conflict. And then we're going to dive into some themes, again, that General Berger started yesterday. So if you heard what General Berger said, you might know what we're going to talk about, but I think we're going to go a little deeper on it. So with that, I will start just going down the panel here with Sean. Go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about something you're passionate about.
Yeah, thanks, Howie. I guess I'll just start out with thanks for the opportunity to be here and talk to y'all. Until about a month and a half ago, I was in the 1st Island Chain, serving with the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force as the G4. And I see some of my friends here, Lonnie McGee in the back and some others. So it's great to be here and back in the United States. I now serve as a G3 at Marine Corps Training and Education Command. And so the opportunity to sort of enrich the logistics tribe, if you will, and through that new duty. I've got an eclectic past, and just Howie, in the vein of introducing kind of like where we're at and where I come from, I've got probably as much time outside the logistics world as I do inside. And so, I grew up traditionally in the logistics field, infantry battalion, tank battalion, some other things. Had the opportunity to command a company in Fallujah, Iraq. You heard from Pat Kelleher yesterday. He was my battalion commander. So led by some tremendous humans. And then, later on, had the opportunity to serve on Capitol Hill as a congressional fellow, had the opportunity to serve at in the Joint Staff, in the J4, helping to write the Joint Concept for Contested Logistics. And then later on, the opportunity to serve as a Director of Concepts and Plans at the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab before I went to 3MEF. And really the opportunity to take the things that we talk about in places here back home on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., and apply it in a real setting and understand what it means and feel what it feels like very viscerally in that environment was better than anything I could have hoped for. But what I feel passionately about is the distinction between talk and reality. There's a lot of talk about logistics, but some of us see that there's not a lot of reality when it comes to the resources and the money and the things that actually matter to turn the talk into action. So there's a chasm there. And no other place have I felt it more specifically than in the first island chain with the 3rd MEF. And all of our partners in the first island chain, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard now, feel that acutely. And just not to put too fine a point on it, but I'll say contested logistics to us in the first island chain sometimes looks like Hurricane Mawar that knocks us squarely on our ass for months and calls into question our preparedness to actually fight the fight that everybody talks about back here in Washington. And so I feel passionately about closing the chasm there, and some of that has to do with just sheer identification of requirements, doing the math, doing the threat-based scenarios, laying out the numbers, and offering it to the decision makers in clear and unmistakable terms that look like culmination at a specific number of days, and then allowing those people the opportunity to advocate on behalf of the service and the joint force and otherwise. And in some places, the assumption that I wrote out into the first MEF with, or 3rd MEF with, was that we knew our requirements down to the numbers, by class of supply, by warfighting function. And the moment I crossed the international date line, that went straight to hell in a handbasket. It was an incorrect assumption. And so I would encourage everybody in here and the folks that may watch this later on to take a hard look at whether we've done the math, the basics. Because in all too many scenarios, it's not done. And therefore, the things we talk about are uncompelling. And we can't speak to them in terms of things that actually allow our leadership to take it to the well and go across the river, so to speak. And so I'm pretty passionate about trying to close that gap. And with that, I'll lay it there, and I'm sure we'll pick that apart later on.
I think we will, and I think you heard it yesterday. For those of you who heard General Berger, as logisticians, part of the reason we have not been resourced, and I think there's more to it, is because we haven't made a compelling case. So I think Sean's spot on, and we will dive into that. And I think that is something, if you don't walk away with that, then you need to, because that's what we haven't done well, and we're not gonna get resourced unless we do. So with that, over to Vianesa. Good to have you. Go ahead.
Good morning, Colonel Marotto. I kind of was thinking I was going to have a few Air Force jokes I was going to have to defend myself against in front of all these Marines this morning, so thank you. First of all, very honored to be here this morning to talk about logistics. I have a big amount of respect for Marines. I've been stationed and deployed with Marines since I was a captain. And so I have a lot of respect for what you do, and I have enjoyed the last 3 days here. I have learned so much about what I did not know. And so thank you very much, Mr. Greg Lewis, for allowing me to come this morning. My background is logistics. I started off as a logistics planner in the Air Force. What that basically means is that you organize troops to deploy downrange, and you organize exercises in the local area for your airmen. But started off back in the fighter world, and then worked a little bit in space logistics, and then spent the majority of my time in aerial port, which is probably what a lot of you see when you deploy downrange. You might take a C-130, KC-135, you might go in a C-5, C-17. So pretty much my teams were the ones who made sure your cargo and all your people got there safely on time, and hopefully you got all your cargo. But anyways, started off in that, was active duty for 11 years and decided at that point that I was done with military service. At that time, the Air Force was the most stringent as it related to their women returning to military service after delivering children. Think about it, it's really strange, but the Air Force, it was 6 weeks. And if I'm not mistaken, at the time, Marine women had 9 months to a year to get back into service. So after I had my second child, I was called to go back. And at that point, the Air Force was doing a lot of in lieu of operations. And so you're talking about commanding truck convoys across Iraqi deserts, things of that nature. So made my decision, put a plan into place, and then separated from active duty and joined the reserves. At the same time, I went into business. I ran a company for several years, opening up gyms. Also had my own line of energy bars, and then came COVID. And they said, V, we need you back in the fight. And by all means, I came back on active duty. So now I'm an AGR. I've done several different, I guess you could say, PCSs. Since then, I've been at Charleston, went back to Travis Air Force Base. Also, my last assignment before the current one I have now is I was the Deployment and Distribution Operations Center Chief at Transcom. So I have a bird's eye view of what all services do as far as global mobility is concerned. If you have questions about the Afghan airlift, that's what I did. If you have questions about the Ukraine lift, that's what I did. And any other kind of location that you sent your Marines to, I was in charge of the execution piece of that. And so now I'm actually the commander of the 459th Mission Support Group, which is stationed at Andrews Air Force Base up in the DC area. And with that mission, we are the 801X mission related to the nuclear mission for the KC-135s. So I'm not quite sure if everybody understands how an Air Force wing operates, but our wings are commanded by colonels, and right up underneath there you have the groups. And so groups are commanded by colonels. I'm one of them, along with the operations group. You've got the maintenance group, and depending on where you are, we have medical. And under there are the different units that are commanded by lieutenant colonels and majors. So my passion is actually resilience of airmen throughout their lifetime, from airmen all the way up to when a man or a woman decides that they no longer want to serve. I want to make sure that they are the healthiest and the most resilient that they can be. And I take that role very seriously. I've been into really good conversations about how women can continue to serve after we hit our 45s and our 50s. Unfortunately, women in the private sector tend to want to leave the workforce after about the age of 52 due to reasons that are outside of our control. And it's my job in the military to attack that so women as well as men can continue to serve as long as they want to. That's all I have.
Well, thanks, Vianesa. As a fellow reservist, I am grateful that you came back, and I've also faced certain life decisions that drove me off the active component, but then brought me back, like you. And the other thing is, it's interesting, when we think about logistics, and even logistics in conflict, we don't think about the nutrition piece. You know, part of logistics is chow, right? And that became very poignant for me and General Dana in Afghanistan. For those of you who know General Dana, the infantry division was saying they were losing weight at a cyclic rate, right? Too much. They weren't getting the nutrition from the MREs, so we needed to get these supplemental drinks for them. And I remember, anybody from DLA in the crowd here? DLA, anybody left? Yeah, DLA jumped through incredible hoops to get us airlifted a bunch of, nutrition drinks for these Marines. And I still remember General Dana saying, hey, Howie, if these guys don't drink this, you and I are going to be drinking a lot of nutrition drinks, because DLA spent $13 million to buy those and then expedite those to the fight. So when we think about logistics, we often forget about that. So it's interesting in your career background, but a very poignant story for me about logistics and conflict and how do you sustain the force, not just from a parts perspective, but a nutrition perspective. So kind of an interesting story about that. We can talk more about that later, but I like how the tie-in works with that. So last but not least, we have Lieutenant Colonel Ed Wu. And before Ed starts, I'm gonna just blatantly patronize him and the Army. You know, I thought we were good at logistics in the Marine Corps, down to the last tactical mile, but being the Deputy 4 of the MEF in Afghanistan, and you might not wanna hear this, Marines, but it's true. We would not have been successful in Helmand Province without the Army. Certainly the Air Force. We had something called Red Horse. Anybody know what Red Horse is? Raise your hand if you know what Red Horse is. Guess who was running the airfield at Camp Leatherneck? Not the Marine Corps, it was Red Horse. So that was Air Force. And then the Army, and we'll probably talk a little bit more as we go on the panel about what the Army did for us, but incredible work. They did the Lord's work, and they died on our behalf doing missions we probably should have been doing but weren't. So I will always be grateful to the Army, and with that, Ed, I'll throw it over to you.
Sir, that was amazing. I just want to say thank you for that. Amazing introduction and segue. First want to say it's an incredible, tremendous honor for me to be here, to be surrounded by such outstanding professionals. And I just wanted to say a resounding good morning to everybody. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Ed Wu. I spent about over 22 years of Army logistics planning, programming, and executing. I do want to say that I spent over half my Army career in the Indo-Pacific, whether that be planning the first island chain, second island chain, and or the Republic of Korea during the Set the Pen initiative when things were getting very sporty in that side of the world. Oftentimes we look at where we are in the world today from a global perspective, and the Army has decided me to be the Chief of Strategic Mobility, where I'm stationed in the Pentagon as the Chief of the Strategic Mobility Division in the Army staff. It was always my dream to serve in the Pentagon, and I'm living my dream today.
We don't believe you, but go ahead. Keep going ahead.
A couple of things I'm passionate about is forward presence of material stocks that should and ought to be expanded in terms of our footprints from behalf of the United States material, because our face to the field is so paramount, because the way I look at logistics and conflict from a joint perspective, the more material that we have positioned forward across the Atlantic or across the Pacific, the better positioned in a chessboard we are as a nation to realize the national defense strategy's prescribed integrated deterrence. I see that as the linchpin of how we can get after our adversarial incentives to supplant the United States as a leader in the rules-based international order. And I see that as a true and real threat as I continue to look at the world from a neoclassical realist perspective. Because if we don't have an aggressively deterrence mindset, then we create these vulnerabilities where if we're not investing in resourcing and maintaining the readiness of our forward prepositioned stocks, then we are giving up that decision and physical trade space, so that physical blunt layer before our surge and incredible Marines arrive to when the war become degraded over time. And with that said, my second passion with regards to forward positioning is how do we mission command all of that? General Bergen made an incredible comment yesterday about the potential of logistics driving operations, but how do we conduct that sustainment mission command? Is there a single point of command where the combatant commander can look over to that individual, that person, and say, okay, where are we in the fight across the competition conflict continuum? Right now in the competition phase, I argue that is the most important phase, because the more investments we have in forward positioning, the better off we are in terms of deterrence. Now, how do we mission command that? Is it the J4? Is it Air Force Material Command? Is it Transcom? Is it Army Material Command? Is it SDDC? We don't know. It's going to take a joint effort, a multinational effort, to ensure that the mission command piece of all the forces that are flowing into the theater are orchestrated, synchronized, and integrated at echelon, so we can inform the command commander, the theater commander who's responsible for the command plan, that the national interests are realized in that area of the world. Sir.
It's perfect, Ed, and I appreciate you talking about pre-positioned stock, and it kind of ties back into what Sean said about requirements. I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about when I was embedded with the 19th ESC in Korea, Army Sustainment Command. And how many of you all know the acronym ASOS?
Oh.
A few. Of course, you should. But every Marine in this room and everyone in this room should know that that's Army Support of Other Services. I was amazed in Korea when the G3 came to me and said, "Hey, Howie, you're the LNO. You just offloaded a ship of ammunition, right, in this exercise. Here's what we have available for you to move that. What's your requirement?" The amazing thing was, and this is something you touched on, Sean, I called down to MAR4K, and I'm like, "Hey, we just offloaded this ship. The Army has trains and boats ready to move that capability, those assets, that ammunition, in this case, Class 5, north. What's our requirement? How many train cars or how many LCUs?" And you know what MAR4K's answer was? And this is not that long ago. We don't know. We couldn't define our requirement. The Army was ready to support us and had assets lined up to support us already. We couldn't tell the Army what we needed. That's a problem, right? And I think that goes into what I'd like to kind of pull the thread on, following that theme, and we'll just go down the line here. Sean, you know, when I was deputy commander of 4th MLG, I told the commanders that I never, ever want to hear a PME that was on success. I only want your PMEs to focus on failure, because success hides failure. We gloss over it, because in success, and the commandant talked about it yesterday, we just make shit happen. We don't talk about all the hard things. We just celebrate, great, we did a great job. We don't talk about all the things that we failed at and somehow overcame. But in failure, you can't hide anymore, right? And the best PME I heard was on the failure in Ukraine, not the Ukraine today. There's no Brits in here. I wish there were, because this, you know, I'd like to hear their perspective on it. But it was the Crimean War, but in the 1800s. You had thousands, literally thousands of tons of food sitting on docks in the Crimea, while British soldiers were starving to death because of a failure in the system. It wasn't that there wasn't logistics. It was they couldn't get it to the folks that needed it, and literally British soldiers starved while there was thousands of tons of food on the dock. That was a failure. There's a lot to learn from that. I'm not gonna dive into that, but that's kind of where I'm going with this. So as we look at our current failures or past failures, Sean, what can you think of one that you want to highlight, and then how could we address that failure? And then we'll go down the line for each of you to talk to something like that, historical or personal.
Yeah, I won't take you down the road of personal. That'll get dark fast. But where to start, right? In my mind, I can think of plenty, but you kind of hit on it before. We don't fail, right? Marines don't. That's not how we're built. I think that's conditioned us. I was having a conversation in the hallway with somebody, but I think we were conditioned to not fail, right? And as logisticians, making it happen is sort of it's kind of the way we're built. And alternatively, or the corollary is that we've conditioned the combat arms elements to believe that we won't fail. And so the underlying assumption is that the provision will be there. And so there may be a failure brewing just beneath the surface in terms of our will to actually carry through the things that are rhetoric, that we use in rhetoric. And so, you know, that brings out kind of like, what does a failure of deterrence look like? And if we're in the Indo-Pacific and we have a discerning and sophisticated adversary who can identify and recognize and measure our political will by the degree of investment in infrastructure and in resources and in transportation capacity and so forth in the first island chain, I think that there's a brewing failure of deterrence right there. I think we have the pieces to stitch it together again, but that's where my mind goes is a failure of deterrence, and whether or not on one hand at that end, but then on the other is a failure internally to our system here. And this kind of brings me back to my place in training and education command, which is how do we break the paradigm? How do we break the mindset that we've established and the conditions that we've established as logisticians by way of our success? And how do we stop a failure in that regard?
Sean, I really like that. And it kind of builds on what Ed said, is logistics is deterrence. We talk about sustainment, we talk about distribution, But we don't talk about logistics and intelligence, as the commandant did, logistics and attack, or logistics and deterrence. And I think that's a theme we'll pull the thread on for the next topic. But before we get to that, I'd like to hear from Vianesa and Ed. Go ahead.
So I have to talk about something that's pretty uncomfortable, but I think that as senior leaders, we should all have, of course, something that we're passionate about, and then we also have something that we're also interested in. And so I don't want to get political here in the room, but I will say, and I spoke about this earlier, is I'm deeply concerned about cartel violence in the United States, particularly as it relates to the logistics networks that have been set up from the Northern Triangle all the way up through North America. This used to be an item that was in our national security strategy, was to fight cartel violence, the networking that is occurring from different organizations that are partnered with China, Russia, countries that wish to do us a lot of harm. And so after working, again, at Transcom and looking and seeing what's going on, our Coast Guard is doing a tremendous job. My goodness, I have much more respect for the Coast Guard than I ever did. But it is deeply concerning just to see how networked those organizations have become in what has been America's longest war, which is America's war on drugs. That is America's longest war. And it's something that we've kind of like did something about in the 80s and then kind of like just said, okay, it's just here and there's not much we can do about it. But in the meantime, we're talking about submarines, we're talking about road, rail, aircraft, getting fentanyl into our nation and destroying the promise of our youth. That affects all services. You look at the young folks that are out there that are getting involved in drugs, it's deeply concerning. We all have, well, not so much the Marines, but definitely the Air Force, Army, and Navy have a serious recruiting challenge right now. Marines met their goals, we haven't. And so I look at that as a tremendous area of opportunity that we've kind of looked at and shifted away from, but in the meantime, it's become deadlier. And when you listen to those cartel leaders, they talk about this is war, and they're saying that on our shores. So I'm pretty concerned about that.
I love the fact you brought that up. And we had a discussion prior to that. There's a lot we can learn from the cartels, and there's a lot we need to do about them. What's interesting, where does most of the fentanyl in the world come from? China. So you ask yourself, do you think that's accidental? Do you think that they're funneling that fentanyl into the United States by accident? Do you think they're leveraging the cartels because it's convenient or to make money? Or do you think that there's a larger strategic plan there, right? And wait a second. We've talked, to Sean's point, we talk about contested logistics. Who's been doing contested logistics for 30 years and been successful? The cartels, right? When we first started in Nextlog 2015, the first thing that Chris Wood and I did was we looked at how were the cartels being successful, because they were operating in a contested logistics environment and succeeding every day. And I do believe that the Coast Guard does Lord's work, but for every semi-submersible that they catch, who knows how many got through? You know, before Hamas was great at tunneling, who was great at tunneling? The cartels. For every tunnel we find, how many tunnels don't we find, right? So I think, one, we can learn a lot about contested logistics from the cartels, but at the same time, we can learn about how to interdict contested logistics by interdicting the cartels. And if we don't think that Southcom is important, if we don't think interdicting the cartels are a matter of national strategy and a way that we can counter China, I think you need to reevaluate that. So, Vianesa, I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you. All right, over to you.
One of the things that keep me up at night are some of the aspects of the challenges of the tyranny of distance from the strategic support area to the, let's say, the Indo-Pacific, Northeast Asia. Over 6,000 nautical miles from the western seaboard of Western CONUS to Northeast Asia. It'll take about approximately, if you're going really fast, faster than 16 knots, approximately 12 days of sail time to get material to the point of need. Talk about pitting the speed of bureaucracy against the speed of need when the joint warfighter needs that material. I'm deeply reticent to say that in the Indo-Pacific, wherever that we saw that wargaming in this past at 8:30, that scenario with the map, it brought to bear some of the challenges. And one of the deep concerns that I have is our contested homeland. Tying into the cartel discussion, how do we know, or how do we not know, that there are some planted folks who are willing to create vulnerabilities in the contested homeland? And I'll use rail cars as an example. I'm not picking on rail cars because I think rail cars are one of the most often overlooked commodities that are absolutely critical to our ability to project the force. For example, across over 20 depots, arsenals, plants, as the Army is the executive agent, the DAFL sometimes, the directive authority for logistics, lead service and base operating support integrator functions. Let's say munitions, right? Let's say it needs to go from Bluegrass to a port. That's thousands of miles of rail cars that are vulnerable. How do we not know that those rail cars in the DFRIF program, the Defense Freight Railway Interchange Fleet that is governed by the Department of Defense, how does that munition get from that plant to the port? Not on trucks. It can go by air, but it's probably not economical to do that. It goes by rail. And if those rail cars and the rail tracks are compromised, it creates a backlog, which brings to my original point of our investments in preposition stocks reduces that strategic lift vulnerability that is large and real, that if we're not vigilant enough to offset that in that trade space, then we're doing a grave disservice to our nation.
I think that's a great point, Ed. And I would ask the Marines, there's a lot of logisticians there, how many of you participated in rail ops in your career? A few. Most of us don't even realize that as logisticians in the Marine Corps, we have a mission to do that. But you pointed out, it is a critical vulnerability. How many rail lines run through rural areas where no one's observing anything, right? Very easy to sabotage tracks. Wait, when did we sabotage the tracks in the United States in war? Oh, I mean the Civil War? All the time, right? The North and the South were always trying to sabotage each other's tracks. So we have a history of it. What is old is new again. So we should be able to learn from that, but we forget. So I think I'm gonna shift gears slightly. I'm gonna build on that theme. So we heard the Commandant talk about it yesterday, is logistics in the attack. We know we're identifying many of our critical vulnerabilities, what keeps us up at night. How can, and this is what I'm gonna put to the panel, in each of your opinions, what can we do? And I think, Ed, you've already touched on it a bit in your opinion, but we want to dive into it maybe more. What can we do to interdict the adversary's logistics? And we can go from the mine to the factory to their troops. I don't really care where we do that, but I'm interested in each of your opinions on what can we do in an offensive way to interdict the adversary's logistics. So.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it. There's been for a little bit of time a kind of a look, at least last time I was in the Pentagon, some folks refer to it as red logistics. And there's some FFRDCs and others out there that are doing some really good work around some of that. But I think the way, part of how I look at it is we talk about seizing key maritime terrain an awful lot, at least in the Marine Corps. And I think in some ways we do that. We can do that through logistics. And so when we start thinking about the forward positioning of resources, we start thinking about our partners and our allies, and we start recognizing the reality of our dependencies upon them. We have the opportunity to leverage logistics and the posturing of material and resources along with our partners and our allies in key maritime terrain in a way that denies our adversary the relative freedom of movement and the ability to conduct their own island hopping campaign, so to speak, the way that we start to see we could see in the Sakashima Islands, the way we could see around Mischief Reef, the way we could see around Second Thomas Shoal and so forth. And so just recognizing that there are pieces of land, otherwise maybe micro-terrain, that represents key maritime terrain, that we could leverage in conjunction with our partners and allies to deny our adversary. I think that's a significant constraint or restraint that we put on them, and we can use that to pretty significant effect.
I think it's a great point, Sean. And if you don't think the Chinese are aware of that, why are they building a pipeline through Pakistan? Because they don't want to go through the Straits of Malacca, right? So key terrain, I think that's a critical point, and often we overlook it. As logisticians, we should be looking at all of that. So over to you, Vianesa.
So this is actually something I really need to think about a lot more. I think just my initial thought about it, and it's not super well thought out, but I think I'm pretty concerned about the speed at which China has been able to develop tankers for air refueling. So just from my perspective, being at a tanker wing, seeing as how quickly they're being able to bring on that technology, where they're getting their fuel from, things of that nature. I need to formulate more thought about that, but just my initial thought is just air refueling. You know, they're creating fighters, things of that nature. There's also some things that have been occurring on the secret side as far as interdiction. So more to come on that one.
I think that's a great point, Vianesa, and it's interesting, looking at a different problem years ago in the Pentagon, back 2008, and I don't know if Akil's out there somewhere, but you know, he worked on this problem, as we were looking at the amphibious fleet, our fleet, our allies' fleets, our potential adversaries' fleets, and what we saw was, while everyone else was staying pretty static or diminishing their fleet, the Chinese were growing their amphibious fleet at an exponential rate. This was in 2008. And that was, I think we were a bit surprised by it, but what we realized was China had seen what we did in World War II and was thinking, well, we're going to do what America did then, and we're going to do it better, while America's forgotten about that. And I didn't know about the tankers, but I think that's along a similar vein. The Chinese have looked at what we were successful at, and they're trying to be successful at it too. And so, but also we know where our challenges were, so kind of back to the offensive theme, okay, they're building more tankers, they're building more amphibious ships. What's a critical vulnerability that creates? We know what it is inherently because we've been challenged with it, but I think along those lines, let's look at what they're doing, and then let's look at where we've had challenge with it, and how can we insert those challenges into their supply chain and their system. So, all right, Ed, over to you.
Sir, I just want to say I love that term, logistics in the attack. I think that's a volume of a plethora of strategic levers that can be offered to the commands. And I see logistics in the attack as an aggressive, integrated deterrence campaign. I think right now, our footprint, U.S. footprint across the globe is not enough. I think we are in a competition, an intense competition phase with our near-peer adversaries, whether it be across the Atlantic or across the Pacific. Right now, the leadership in China, if I may, has a charm offensive where they're trying to, and they're being very successful at it, having that community strengthen resolve in terms of strengthening China's presence in that region. I think in order to offset that, the United States has a tremendous opportunity right now to increase our presence material-wise by offsetting our near-peer adversary. Countries right now that we're growing into are obviously the Philippines. I've heard about that national effort, Australia, of course. But the other fence-sitting nations I'm most concerned about because economically they're so intertwined with the Belt and Road Initiative, with China's, and their One China policy. But they look at the United States for security purposes. I think there's a huge opportunity there to sway those fence-sitting nations towards the United States so that the United States is perceived as a security and economic guarantor of that region and not our near-peer competitor. I do also want to say that by doing that ends, ways, and means, the means to get to that end state is to increase, maybe through the guise of humanitarian aid, disaster relief, material positioning, Class 2, as an example, in nations such as Indonesia, Thailand, etc. And also across the Atlantic, in Europe, not just right now, in the Netherlands. I know the Marines have pre-positioned material in Norway. We have Army has pre-positioned material in Germany, etc. But other countries in NATO to strengthen that resolve. I think that is sort of a logistics and attack mode, because I truly believe the center of gravity is in the competition phase, so that as we continue to strengthen the shield, right, our near competitors will not have any inclination to realize their objectives as well.
I think that's a great point, and not all war has to be won during war, right? There's some guy from China, I'm not sure who his name, I can't remember his name right now. He said, I'm being a little sarcastic. He said, I'm going to be paraphrased slightly in my translation. He said, the best way to win a war is to win it without fighting it, right? Sun Tzu, right? And so pre-positioning sends a message, right? You can win a war without fighting a war. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the best way to win a war is never to have to fight it. And if you're using logistics, pre-positioning, economy, right? 4 elements of national power, if you ascribe to this, which I do, DIME, right? Diplomacy, information, military, and economics. Economics is the big one, the E, right? Pre-positioning is a way to get after the E. It's a way for logistics to get after the E in the 4 elements of national power, right? And don't think the Belt and Road Initiative is a logistics initiative. And the Chinese are exploiting it. They're doing well. They're not successful in every case, but overall, they're doing a lot more than we are to influence hearts, minds, and build up logistics capabilities overseas, which are going to be dual use. Back to your point, they're dual use. I think that's great. So at this point, we've talked for quite a while. I think we've presented some interesting topics to think about and dwell on. So I want to open it up, if we have a little bit of time for questions. Do we have any time for questions? 5 minutes? One question. Okay. Question, sir.
Whether it's from a home base or a pre-positioned supply area, all your logistics in modern society and the things that support the logistics operate on the electromagnetic spectrum in some form. And with the Joint Base San Antonio pilot project with the city of San Antonio, with CPS Energy that controls the electricity, the water, and the gas companies, in support of that, the pilot project is not ready to roll out yet to other major bases or major metropolitan centers. So just keep in mind that our major logistics hubs, as of 2019, DLA revealed a statistic that 91% of daily cargo from U.S. Transcom was handled by third-party logistics companies, and their major hubs, FedEx, UPS, DHL, even U.S. Transcom Fort Scott, they're within the New Madrid seismic zone, which the USGS has stated with geologic regularity every 220 to 250 years, we have a series of major megaquakes in that region of the 8-state region. So you're facing a timeline of major disruption in the central part of the United States in the major logistics hubs, and the transition to move the, like to turn the Titanic, if the Titanic had been more nimble, it would have avoided the iceberg. So we have to turn the logistics from the private sector and the military logistics, start now to turn it to the point where we move out of those areas of vulnerability, and it starts at home with the localized electric grid support, because the bases don't have their own power supplies.
I can definitely talk to this, and I didn't set this up, everyone. So what a lot of people don't know is I was a power line maintenance and construction supervisor, and I switched on the grid. 2003, and I want each of the panelists to talk about a homeland vulnerability that we need to address, but I'm going to talk to yours about the power. 2003, many of you remember the Northeast had a blackout. Do you know, and most of you don't know why, but I'm going to tell you now, how vulnerable our grid is and how easy it is to take it down and how long it takes to come back up. Very quickly, AEP and Dayton Power and Light had a 735 kV line coming up from the river where power generation was at. And because they weren't cutting the trees, it sagged. Power lines sag when they're under load. It was about an 81-degree mean temperature day across that region and sagged into some trees, and they lost the 735 line. Well, that put more pressure on all the other distribution lines. And then a 345 kV line near Akron, Ohio, run by First Energy, sagged into the trees. And at that point, the grid was done in the Northeast, right? And everything, all the breakers at the generation plant started switching off to protect the generation capability, and we had a blackout. And from that blackout, about, depending on where you were at, 7 days without power. That was manufacturing, that was distribution, that was airports. Now, there were backup generators in some cases, but some things you can't back up with generators. They just take too much power. Mostly your industrial plants. So the grid is extremely vulnerable. And I would ask, and something you probably all don't know, the grid is not managed by the government. It is managed by private industry. NERC and FERC, you can look those acronyms up, is private industry responsible for policing themselves. I think we need to reevaluate that kind of along your lines and the industrial capacity that's tied to the grid, and who's protecting it, who's thinking about it, right? And so just a great, interesting point. Power is logistics. Bases generate power. Bases generate in a different sense, and they push it forward. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you. We don't have to talk about power, but what is a critical vulnerability at home on bases or within our infrastructure that and I think you said something about rail, Ed, but we'll let each of the panelists answer this, and then I think we'll be done. So,
Start out.
Sure. I would definitely say our runways at our Air Force installations wide open. So.
And our airfields, our airports. How hard would it be to attack? Think about it. How many of you drive right by and see people watching airplanes come in, right? And they see the airfield right there. And I mean, in theory, we have security, but if somebody's really determined, great point, Vianesa. Sean or Ed?
Yeah, just think that the opportunities, the vulnerabilities are, I mean, they're innumerable, right? And the opportunities for I'll call it infiltration is pretty significant. And I think an awful lot of it's human. You know, the dependencies we have on, as you told us, Howie, the dependencies we have on global multinational firms and commercial interests for the day-to-day workings that are seemingly benign until they're infiltrated and denied, they're innumerable. But the vigilance to kind of, number one, identify our dependencies, and number two, understand sort of a pace plan associated when they go away. I think there's some things we can do about that. But I'm encouraged by some of the work that's been done in Washington and elsewhere around getting our arms around the critical infrastructure problem. You know, no shortage of things that draw attention to critical infrastructure, and we just had the bridge go down, a year ago now? Not even a year ago now, in Baltimore Harbor. But they're innumerable, right? But for us in uniform, just recognizing our dependencies out front gives us a leg up and helps us to prepare for the what-if scenarios.
I think that's a great point, Sean. And we can't stop the adversary from interdicting a lot of those things, but we can have a plan. If we lose something, what's the alternate, right? I think that's a great way to address it. Yeah.
I talked about the infiltration of rail cars, but I can't ignore the fact of a contested homeland vulnerability of being a cyber attack, right? I mean, the cyber defense, I have full faith and confidence. It's amazing what our cyber warriors can do, but there's always that chance of that cyber attack that can take down a network, a grid, whether it's electrical, energy, or an automation field in terms of a supply catalog. I mean, all our infrastructure and our information, data information are synchronized with that, and that could be a vulnerability. Tied to that also is the congested, contested, and competitive space domain. There are so many satellites right now in geosynchronous low Earth orbit that are tied to the contested homeland that the rate of our near-peer competitors and the United States frequency of satellite building and launching them into orbit is becoming very congested. So a collision of any type of satellite there will have direct impacts to our ability to conduct information in the homeland.
Great points. I wish we had more time to dive into some of this, but since we've brought you all down, to this point. Hopefully the next panel will bring everybody back up. But lots to think about. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it. Thank you, panelists. Great job. And feel free to pull any of us aside later on. Appreciate the time. Thank you.